I met my childhood best friend, Martha, during recess on the first day of first grade. It was my first real experience of recess, and it was awful. Everybody ran outside, excited to escape from the confines of the classroom, and everybody seemed to have someone to play with, except me. I wasn't sure what to do with myself, and so I stood with my back to the wall of the school building, trying as much as I could to blend into that wall so that no one would notice that I was left out of the games. But Martha noticed, and she came right up to me and asked in a way that I never would have dared to do, "Would you like to play hopscotch?" I mumbled yes, feeling intensely grateful, but not wanting to show it, of course. Even in first grade, we worry about appearances. So we played together that day and the next, until we became somewhat unlikely friends. You see, the truth was that Martha and I had very little in common. If we met today, or even as teenagers, I'm not sure we would have become friends at all. But she opened her arms to me on that day when I felt vulnerable and alone. She welcomed me when everyone else on the playground was too busy to bother. You don't forget that kind of welcome. Sometimes I wish that I could go back to that childhood obliviousness, that sense that anyone could be a friend. Now I almost know too much about the kind of people that I tend to get along with. I look for certain characteristics, certain ways of life, even certain political views, as much as I hate to admit it, when I am choosing friends. I know who my people are and how to find them, and it limits me. Sometimes I don't know how to get out of my bubble. This can happen to congregations and other kinds of communities as well. There's some implicit decision about who is in and who is out. And if you don't fit the bill, it can be hard to find your place. Not that there's anything fundamentally wrong with wanting to find a place where you feel like you belong. It's a human need, the need to find our people, to have a place where we feel comfortable and at home. I know that this is the story of how many of you found Unitarian Universalism. You arrived here or in a congregation like this one and knew sometimes in an instant that this was your spiritual home. That matters. We need that sense of belonging. At the same time, there can often be a tendency to draw our circles too small in an effort to keep ourselves comfortable. Belonging becomes problematic when it turns into being insular. Think about those middle school and high school cliques, the ultimate teenage experience of belonging or not. And when you stood outside those circles, it was awful, right? Belonging turns into insularity when it gets caught up in our own insecurities. We struggle most with welcoming others when we are struggling with accepting ourselves. There's an old wisdom tale that tells of a dying monastery with only 5 monks left in it. This monastery had once been a flourishing place of study and faithful service. But over the years, it had gotten a bad reputation. The monks were known for being a little cranky with one another, and all the spirits seemed to have retreated from that place. So they had few visitors and hadn't had a new brother join the order in years. The abbot of the monastery was understandably worried. He knew that he and the other brothers were getting older, and he didn't want that monastery to disappear. And so one day, the abbot decided to go visit a rabbi who lived in the woods nearby to see if he might have any advice about reviving the community. The abbot and the rabbi sat together for hours over tea, having wide-ranging conversations about faith and spirituality and the struggles of leadership. As the abbot got up to go, he thanked the rabbi for the conversation and said, "The only thing we didn't get to was how to save my monastery. Do you have any advice?" The rabbi shook his head and said, "No, I don't have any advice for you, but I will tell you this. The Messiah is among you." Now the abbot puzzled on this strange declaration all the way home, wondering what the rabbi could have possibly meant. When he arrived back at the monastery, the monks gathered around, eager to hear if the rabbi had any advice for them. He didn't offer any advice, the abbot told them, but he did say a strange thing as I was leaving. He said that the Messiah is among us. I don't know what that means. The brothers did not speak of the meaning of these words, but over the next few months, each of them pondered what the rabbi might have meant with that statement. Who was the Messiah? Did the rabbi mean that one of the monks was the Messiah? And if so, who could it be? Perhaps it was the abbot. He was the abbot, after all. Or perhaps Brother Al, who always seemed to have the right answer. Perhaps it was the youngest among them, the one who had come only 20 years ago and not 50 years ago. Or perhaps it was the oldest, the wise one. And of course, each one thought at some point, it couldn't be me. Or could it? What if I am the Messiah? As the months went by, the brothers began to treat one another with more and more respect. They weren't about to be cranky with the Messiah, after all. And they began to treat themselves with more respect, too, just on the off chance that they were the one who was the Messiah. And as they offered each other more and more respect, they also noticed more and more the gifts that each of their fellow monks brought to the community. And they began to appreciate one another more as well. Before a year had passed, the monastery began to have a new reputation. It became one of the friendliest, most welcoming places around. A religious home full of the spirit of love. More visitors stopped by, and with each one, the monks wondered, is this the Messiah among us? New brothers joined the community, and once again, it was a thriving monastery. As the years went by, the monks stopped asking themselves who might be the Messiah and began simply treating everyone with the respect and care you might offer to someone you thought was the Messiah. And so it was that the rabbi had saved the monastery with this simple statement: the Messiah is among you. And I wonder what it would be like if we all went about our lives believing that simple statement. The Messiah is among you. I know that some of you might not theologically connect with the concept of a Messiah. That's okay. But just if you would, imagine with me for a moment that you do. Can you do that? Can we go into that imagination place? And now imagine if you welcomed every person you encountered as if they were that Messiah. Can you imagine that? Imagine if you treated yourself as if you might be the Messiah. How might that transform your life? How might that transform the way that you welcome? The way I read this story, those monks were feeling pretty insecure at the beginning. It's not surprising, their community was dying. They weren't sure what more they had to live for. And so they took it out on each other, as we so often do, and on the people who visited, which of course made it all the worse. And then this idea was brought to them that the Messiah might be among them, and everything changed. As their love and care for themselves increased, so too did their love and care for one another and for everyone they encountered. When you respect yourself, it's actually easier to welcome others in. In a way, it's like the story of the mirror that Sadie told us, shining light into dark places. The more you shine it, the more you can see it. You see the same patterns in our congregations, in our communities, and even in our country. Over the past few months, I've been spending a fair amount of time in front of the federal office building in Manchester with some of you here, where immigrants check in each month. I've been there with other members of the Granite State Organizing Project and the American Friends Service Committee to stand vigil as immigrants who have lived in this country for years come for regular check-ins with immigration and customs enforcement. We've been standing vigil the last few months because more and more of those who come to check in have been detained or told to return with plane tickets back to their country of origin. We've been there because more and more New Hampshire immigrant families are being separated or threatened with deportation. This increased enforcement comes from a nationwide rhetoric of fear and insecurity. It's all back to that insecurity. The news tells us that immigrants are taking jobs and money away, that they are making our country worse. And that fundamental human high school clique feeling comes out in us. We wonder, if we let too many people in, will we still get our due? Will we still belong? If we let too many people into our circle, won't that mean that we aren't special anymore? It's these insecurities that put us into categories of us and them. It's these insecurities that hold us back from the true welcoming that we could offer. It's these insecurities that keep us small. It's as true of our country as it is of Unitarian Universalism. Our circle could be wider. Our country could be stronger. Our faith could be bigger. Now, none of this would come without change, the dreaded C word. Welcoming doesn't just mean welcoming into our way of doing things, our way of living. Welcoming means pushing against the edges of our comfort zone. Welcoming in new ideas as we welcome in new individuals. Welcoming means broadening that insular us to a more expansive we. And it means being secure enough in ourselves to be challenged by those who might be different and to not be afraid. I have been standing vigil in front of that federal building in Manchester because I believe love calls us to draw a circle wide enough to take in those who wish to make a better life in this country. Just as I preach Unitarian Universalism wherever I go, because I believe we haven't managed to draw our circle wide enough yet either. Edwin Markham writes in his poem, Outwitted, he drew a circle that shut me out, heretic, rebel, a thing to flout. But love and I had wit to win. We drew a circle that took him in. We need to outwit the forces of fear and insecurity that try to separate us into an us and a them. We need to channel that boldness that my childhood friend Martha had when she saw someone standing alone and didn't care who they were, but asked me to play. We need to look at each person we meet as if maybe they could be the Messiah. Perhaps then love will help us to draw a circle wide enough to take in even those who might try to shut us out. As Leslie Takahashi says, the day is coming when all will know that the rainbow world is more gorgeous than the monochrome, that a river of identities can ebb and flow over the static, stubborn rocks in its course, that the margins hold the center. May it be so for us all.
Give me